Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get into the video, I just want to let y'all know I'm a really blunt type of speaker. Therefore, if I say anything that might sound offensive or harmful, please let me know because that's the last thing I want to do. Alright, so straight up, we live in a world that often misinterprets gratitude to the point where it becomes less appreciative and more performative. I personally believe that practicing gratitude means to deliberately slow down time even when the world around you is moving at light speed. Or, in other words, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. People think that gratitude is simply a reaction to what we receive, but in reality, it's a revelation of what's already there. Yet, despite that, we barely acknowledge it. We walk past our loved ones every single day as if they're going to be alive within the next 24 hours. Or we look at ourselves getting ready in the morning as if our existence was a given. And realizing these things over time has made me wonder, why is anything meaningful? Or what makes something important? Or, if meaning fades, does gratitude fade as well? Ultimately, meaning itself isn't robust. It's very fragile, actually. It doesn't depend on the permanence of what we have, but on the awareness that it can vanish at any given moment. There was a philosopher from the 1800s named Soren Kierkegaard who wrote a really good quote that said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." In simpler terms, we only start to comprehend the value of something after it vanishes. For example, going out with your friends every week before life took over. These types of things become sacred only after they're gone. And yeah, it might feel sickening, but it's not a tragedy. Gratitude isn't necessarily the denial of loss, but rather the acknowledgement that everything we have is temporary, including ourselves. That temporariness is what gives life texture. Think back to some of the cartoons you would watch as a kid. For example, SpongeBob SquarePants being able to express gratitude even in the midst of chaos. As simple as these cartoons were, they remind us that even joy can exist in the smallest of things. It reminds us that life's value doesn't increase with abundance, but it deepens with awareness. The child who runs around in the rain has a deeper sense of gratitude than the adult who waits for the rainbow. But what happens when meaning itself vanishes? When the things that once lit our world burn out? Or when the voice of a loved one becomes a memory? Or when the motive that we had simply becomes irrelevant? At this point, gratitude isn't a reflex, but rather discipline. It requires humility and effort. It requires us to love even the ashes of what ignited us back then. When a relationship ends, not only do we grieve the loss of our person, but we grieve the future that will never unfold between us. No more good morning texts, no more I love you. The timeline between you two comes to a halt, and all that's left is a collage of moments that will no longer grow. And yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow, it fucking sucks. But even gratitude has the ability to transform that pain. We've all heard this quote before: don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Most people think saying that, though, is simply a way of suppressing emotion. But to say something like that, it takes courage. It requires you to drop your ego and recognize that the value of love doesn't reside in its duration, but rather in the fact that it existed and that you were part of it. I've personally been through 2 breakups, and both times, gratitude was the hardest thing to summon. I would usually hold resentment towards that empty feeling that I felt, rather than embracing it. And over time, I realized that gratitude wasn't necessarily about denial, but rather transformation. The person that we all once loved immensely has guided us closer to who God has called us to be. And gratitude stops that guidance from turning into a grudge. It teaches us to possess joy without clinging onto it, to let go without bitterness, and to remember without regret. Even during trials and tribulations, gratitude is what keeps you going as well. It reminds us that even feeling pain is a sign of life. We feel pain because we care, and caring is the essence of being a human being. The fact that you've survived every ounce of pain that you've gone through in your life shows your indomitable human spirit. It's proof of your ability to endure and embrace. And sure, there might be scars, but there's beauty within that as well. In the 2022 Batman with Robert Pattinson, there was a quote that changed my life, and I think it could change yours. It goes, "Our scars can destroy us, even after the physical wounds have healed. But if we can survive them, they can transform us. They can give us the power to endure and the strength to fight." And as we all know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And speaking of endurance, what's one thing all humans endure? Death. more specifically, the death of a loved one. It's interesting how in those moments we always tend to say, oh, I wish I spent more time with them, as if time were a debt that we could even pay off. The truth is, though, we never really know how cherishable a moment is until it becomes a memory. We reminisce on all the fun times we had, like the big events, but it's the mundane things that we ache for, the way they said our name, and the conversations over nothing. But gratitude is what transforms that ache into reverence. It reminds us that those moments did exist, and that we lived them. And at that point, the pain of loss becomes the evidence of love. And then, as the feelings of grief begin to settle, another truth emerges: the regret of letting your anger overshadow certain moments. We recollect on all the arguments and the times that we chose ego over love, wishing that we weren't so cruel back then. We wish we could go back in time and right our wrongs. And then the feeling of remorse, it starts to overwhelm us. And death has a way of amplifying that feeling too. But that's where gratitude also comes in. But it's not to erase the regret, but rather to teach us forgiveness. It reminds us that those moments weren't solely out of anger, but of love as well. They were evidence that, sure, while the pain was hurtful at the time, we cared enough to embrace it for one another. Gratitude doesn't ask us to forget our mistakes, but to rather learn from them, to carry its lessons forward so that in the future we can love more gently, we can be more patient with each other, and waste less time on things that don't matter. And perhaps that's the cruelest, yet most beautiful paradox of gratitude. It's what continues to bloom even when your garden is empty. When a special something or someone is gone, gratitude transfigures into the bridge between what was and what is no more. It teaches us to love, even in absence. To express gratitude, even in the midst of tears, doesn't mean that you're moving on. It means you're moving forward. And once you realize that, you take off so much weight from yourself. There was a philosopher back then named Epictetus who was a Stoic, and he did this little thing with his students where he advised them to contemplate the loss of everything that they loved. And it wasn't out of despair, but to cherish things on a deeper level. If you were to always be aware of the fact that everything you touch could vanish, how differently would you live? Would you start telling people I love you more, knowing that they'll no longer be here one day? Would you admire everything that's really around you rather than what's on that little technological box? Or would you finally understand that gratitude isn't an act of kindness, but of awakening? Most of us scroll for hours on our phone looking at other people enjoying their lives, yet we fail to acknowledge the miracle of having our own pulse. We confuse attention with awareness, information with insight, and stimulus with meaning. And this type of mentality over time leads us to focus on what's next rather than what is. And in doing so, we starve the part of us that thrives on presence. Gratitude in this context is a form of resistance. Even in the midst of chaos, you just gotta pause and smile. Because I feel like a lot of us fail to realize that the position we're in right now, whether or not we're in a predicament, is the position that we prayed to be in a few months or years prior. And this even ties into materialism. So many people, including myself, sometimes wake up saying, oh man, I gotta get rich. I gotta do all this. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to have dreams and aspirations, but sometimes you just gotta take a second to be grateful that you even have a chance at pursuing something like that. It's a privilege to be able to pursue something so vast and to have the resources that allow you to pursue it. Maybe you're working long hours so you can buy that dream car of yours. There's some people out there who are working even longer hours to be able to provide basic necessities for their family, such as food, water, etc. Or so many people say, oh, I'll be happy when I get this, but they're missing the point. You don't become appreciative once life gets better. Life gets better when you become appreciative. Where am I going with this? The person who is grateful while having little to nothing is infinitely richer than the person who has everything yet feels nothing. The irony of abundance is that it dulls our sense of appreciation. If everything's available, nothing is sacred. If you've ever watched The Walking Dead, the first episode actually portrays a great example of this. Basically, after the zombie apocalypse started, there was no hot water, no nothing. And a little bit later into the episode, the characters got hot water working for the first time in however many months. And you see them just dancing, enjoying the hot water as if they've never felt that feeling before. It's fascinating how the very things that keep us safe, clean, and warm can be taken from us in an instant. And if they were to get taken, how would you live without them? If you want to restore that sense of gratitude, you have to change the way you live. You have to view scarcity not as deprivation, but as an invitation to truly live out what you currently have. Here's a better way to put it. Imagine a scenario where you suddenly have 10 breaths left before you just die. How slowly and carefully would you breathe? If you think about it, every breath we take is the result of a chain of generosity. Stars that died to give us carbon, loved ones that sacrificed their comfort for ours, strangers who we don't even know, whose labor is the reason that we have working water, gas, electricity, etc. Being grateful means that you're aware of this interconnectedness. It's humbling and it gets rid of that illusion of self-sufficiency. And history's full of individuals who have practiced this form of awareness. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, wrote down, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." Even in suffering, gratitude was used as rebellion to his despair. It was evidence that meaning cannot be destroyed by anything other than surrender. This guy literally had his family and his dignity taken away from him, and he still had the awareness that life brings beauty as long as you allow it to. In this sense, gratitude becomes a choice, rather than a feeling. We thank the universe not for taking away, but for having given at all. And this humility isn't weakness, it's a foundation for strength. To be aware of life's fragility is not to live in fear, but in reverence. It's what transforms anxiety into peace, greed into appreciation, and loneliness into connection. Gratitude transforms existence from something that we endure to something that we experience as we continue living. Even modern psychology confirms that gratitude can make us happier. People who pursue journaling, like reflecting, or even just solitude, they tend to be happier, they tend to have stronger relationships, and they tend to have a deeper sense of purpose in life. Perhaps another reason that gratitude makes us happier is because it realigns us with reality. To be grateful is to see things as they are, not as what we wish them to be. By practicing gratitude, we stop demanding that life meets our expectations, and we start realizing that life itself, although chaotic and miraculous, has already exceeded them. The Buddhists taught us to detach from cravings, the Stoics taught us to contemplate the loss of something we love, and there's many poets in history that wrote about the beauty of ephemerality, aka the fact that nothing is permanent. So why is gratitude important? Because it rescues us, not from pain, but from emptiness. It gives meaning to light, structure to chaos, and dignity to loss. It's the voice inside of you that whispers, "I'm still here, I'm still breathing, and that's all I need." To the 20-year-old who's lost, to the heartbroken lover, and to the restless soul, gratitude is your anchor. It does not ask you to be naive. It does not ask you to be blindly optimistic, but it asks you to see clearly, to recognize that the very act of being conscious, of existing, of experiencing, is an unmerited miracle from God Himself. As humans, we don't deserve anything, yet we've been given everything. And when that day comes, which it will, everything that you love will fade away, and all that will remain are memories. And in that moment, you'll realize that gratitude was never about holding on, but about letting go with grace. It was about being able to say thank you, even when goodbye was the only word left. Gratitude is not a virtue, but a perspective instead. It's the acceptance that nothing lasts in this world. And that, my friend, is precisely why everything has meaning. I appreciate y'all watching. Y'all have a good one.